director of football at Tottenham, you were involved when Christian Gross was put to you. With Alan Sugar saying, get some info on him because I've never heard of him. And neither had anybody else either. Alec Ferguson never heard of him. Nobody appears to have actually had anything on his background apart from obviously what he'd done in his home country. But he did have the same agent as Jurgen Klinsmann.
Yes, a man called Andy Gross. Yeah, that was his agent. But he was a good man. A hard-working man. The players resented them coming in on Sundays for a warm-down. They resented 2 training sessions a day. He was a tough man. Chris Hughton got on well with him, who was working with him. He wanted to bring his coach over, a man called Marcel Schmidt, I think, and they couldn't get him a permit. And he didn't get what I call player cooperation. And it was very difficult for him. He was a good man. I spoke to him plenty. He was a good communicator. And it was rather sad. Mr. Sugar came in and said that I think it was on the Friday. I made the decision. We're going to make a change, and he must have told him on that Friday. And he came in anyway. He went. He didn't tell him on the Friday. But they went to Everton on the Saturday, and I said to Sugar, "What if they win at Everton? You're going to change your mind?" Anyway, they won at Everton 1-0. He didn't change his mind. Christian was very upset. He was a good man. And he had a very short spell there. And he succumbed to player power.
You were then called in to take over again, not for the first time, as the caretaker. And then you get the call from Sugar saying, I want you to come over and discuss George Graham. I mean, remember this at the time, and the discussion amongst Tottenham fans. I mean, it was quite incredible that they were even considering not only an Arsenal coaching legend, but a playing legend as well.
Well, it was a strange one. George wanted to come back to London. His agent was a man called Steve Cutner. It obviously spoke to Sugar saying that a deal can be done if you pay Leeds. I think Ridsdale was in charge at Leeds. A certain amount of money, he'd be happy to come. Maybe it needed a strong disciplinarian like George with his reputation. But of course, the downside was that George was a very well-organised coach, but was happy on many occasions and got the reputation of Arsenal of winning 1-0. But they were winning. Could the crowd tolerate that if the football wasn't exciting or enterprising? And Alan Sugar said, "What's the downside?" And I said, "Well, I've always got on with George. I've known him since he was 15. I'm sure we'll have no problem with communication. The downside is, I suppose, what is the compensation? Is that what you're talking to me about? In other words, if it doesn't come off," and he told me a figure, which I think was correct. And it turned out that way in the end. And George was solid. But as you know, the supporters at the time weren't overly happy, and it turned out a poor appointment. Even though George was quality in himself.
Your suggestion, though, at the time, and you suggested this man on a couple of occasions to take over, who would have seemed to be the ideal fit for the fans. I'm not so sure he would have fitted in the boardroom. He has a very strong-willed personality, but Martin O'Neill.
Yes, indeed. He was at Celtic. He was flying. He was doing well. He'd already done well in England. And I thought Martin would be a good man. And I spoke to Martin. If we wanted to pursue, would you be interested? Martin gave me the impression that he would be open to talks with whoever may want to speak to him. That's his option, and that's what most managers would say. But he also said he was perfectly happy there at the moment. But we didn't pursue it. Alan Sugar says, I believe, in his book, in his autobiography, that I didn't fight hard enough and I wasn't strong enough in terms
Yes, you're right. You say that in your book. You said you should have been more forceful in your views to get Martin.
Yes, that's what he said. I'll accept that, I think. But there was further problems as well with the owners of Celtic were very strong, tough individuals at the time. Well documented. They had problems at one time with Sir Alex over a horse, but the ownership of a horse. But anyway, the bottom line was Martin didn't come, and we took George.
When Daniel took over, you were put in a position where they came in and they said, right, okay, Hoddle or Vialli.
Buckler was the vice chair, a man called David Buckler, and he did come into my office. I had a small office which I rarely went to at White Hart Lane because I was at the training ground, and he did come in and say, "What do you think, Vialli or Hoddle?" And I wasn't overly surprised. I was surprised that he mentioned Vialli because I hadn't heard his name mentioned before. I found out that Vialli was a very good coach, very well respected. He'd been at Watford, I think. And the only thing I said to Dave Buckler at the time is, "Have you spoke to Ken Bates at length about Glenn?" You know, Glenn was like the Messiah. Glenn was a top player, wonderful player, played off both feet. He was excellent. And of course, I said to Buckler, I said, "Look, you've already made your decision. I've been reading about it for days in the newspaper. So, you know, is it just a fait accompli, or are you really want me to really say what I think and maybe even make other considerations, other nominations?" But no, the board had decided, and I think it was part of when Alan Sugar left. He had great problems with George over the Associated Newspaper court case, and as a consequence of that, I think that when Daniel took over, Enoch took over, I think part of the agreement was, which often happens when there's a takeover, that the manager changes. And that's how Glenn came to be in situ. And his agent was the notorious Dennis Roach.
You're still picking out talent for Spurs at the time. And there's a long list in this book here of players you're thinking, good, if only they'd have signed them. One was Petr Cech, that you recommended. The other was another incredible player who I've seen many, many times, Diego, who was at Santos at the time, which it looked as if you were going to get over the line. Was this a cause of frustration that they seem to be letting a lot of talent slip through their fingers?
Well, it's very difficult, you know, to get a signing done, and also for decent money. In terms of Petr Cech, it was recorded at a board meeting. We had a close relationship with Slavia Prague, so I knew people in Czechoslovakia, as it was then. And there was no question. They were all talking about this young goalkeeper. I think it was to get a team called Balsami when he was just starting off. He was already 6'6", and he played in youth tournaments abroad for his country. And there was a lovely man called, oh my word, first word. Jan Richter, who spoke to me, and he said, must get this goalkeeper." I recorded it at a board meeting, actually, that he'd been highly recommended we should try and sign this player. It didn't happen in his case. He went into one of the Prague teams, and then he went to Rennes. And I think he went for about 8 million to Rennes. And of course, then the story is, of course, Chelsea signed him from Rennes. In fact, Hans Sagers, who worked with Glenn as goalkeeper coach, went to watch him, and he didn't do so well, evidently, according to Hans. And we kind of just let it drift. Chelsea came in and signed him. That would have been a great signing for Tottenham, no question. And the other player that you referred to was, tell me again?
Diego,
I went to Brazil. And unfortunately, within 24 hours of going to Brazil and meeting him at his apartment on the beach, he played for the great team Santos. They had some wonderful players: Elano, Robinho, who else? Renato, the centre back Alex, who came to Chelsea. Elano went to Man City. Robinho, everyone knows about. They had a terrific team. And he was in that team, Diego. And unfortunately, the father took more of he had an agent at the time, but then the father took over the percentage that the agents had. The father went and got more of the pie type of thing. And I remember it was a university professor who then was, I think, the president or the chairman of the club. But it got out that we were over there looking at him. And as you can imagine, then all of a sudden they started talking about, well, it's going to be more money. And then they said there was other clubs interested. And after about, I think, 3 days I was there, I came back and I realised that this was going to be very difficult to do. And it didn't happen. He had a wonderful career in top clubs. And I think at one time Mourinho signed him, and he played at all Italian clubs, German clubs. He was a fabulous little player. Diego.
Scored a lot of goals. Again, your involvement in the search for managers that didn't come, but that you met and you talked with. Again, it's an incredible collection. Roberto Mancini, Giovanni Trapattoni, Gus Hiddink with Frank Arnsesen. Trapattoni was actually offered the job. Was he the one that came closest to actually accepting? I know they wanted Mark Hughes in as his number 2.
Yeah, that's correct. We saw Trapattoni and Mancini. We went to Italy. I went with Secretary John Alexander. Trapattoni could speak very little English. Mancini was younger, more aware of Tottenham Hotspur and its history. But the board thought that Trapattoni's experience would be the one. And we thought that Mark Hughes, who was, flying in his early managerial career, would be a good. Who was also the agent, was the man from Dennis Roach, and it never happened. Trapattoni came to watch a game. He sat with the board the following day, and he said he would like the job. However, he went back to Italy and immediately rang us and said he didn't think he could do the job, maybe because his wife wasn't well. We waited, I think, 2 weeks. We gave him 2 weeks to decide. And he came back and said he couldn't take it. And at the moment, he's going to take a rest out of football. Very quickly after that, he went and signed, I think, for Strasbourg, one of the Red Bull teams. Anyway, I'm pretty certain of that.
Yes, it was.
So Trapattoni didn't come. Mark Hughes, Dennis Roach's agent, said he wanted to not be a number 2. He wanted to be a number 1 if he was going to go to any club. And so we were foiled, and it didn't happen. Looking back retrospectively, Mancini might have been a good choice.